Yeah. Bring it down a little bit, Eddie. Yeah. A little bit. Right there. Here we go. Here we go. Hey, baby, what you know good? I'm just getting back what you knew I would. Boys, when will it end? When will people start getting together again? Things will get better. The newspaper read. What else is new, my friend? Besides what I read, can't find no work, can't find no job, my friend. Money is tighter than it's ever been. Woo! Hey man, I just don't understand what's going on across this land. What's happening, brother? Hey, what's happening? I wanna know, I wanna know. Things still get down when we used to go with things. Now I'm up when I fit it. Do you think they have a chance? Can tell me, friend, how in the world have you been? Tell me what's out. I wanna know what's in. Woo! What's the deal? What's the deal, man? What's happening? What's happening, brother? What's happening? What's happening, brother? I wanna know what's happening. What's happening, my man? Been gone a long, long time. Now I'm back on the scene. What's happening, brother? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening, brother? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening?
Okay, good afternoon, or good evening, rather, in the East. We are very grateful that you have decided to join us for yet another edition of Conversations with Conrad. And I am your host, Reverend Conrad Tillard. And if you're listening to Conversations with Conrad, you are in a good place because we come to you as a new program, not from the right that most African-American programs today come from. The left, where most African-American programs come from. Most African-Americans speaking today, talking today, sharing today are oriented toward a left sort of orientation, a political left. But nor do we come to you from the right. That has its own problems, its own unique narrowness. Rather, we come to you from an African American perspective, right down the middle. We come to you from the mother's wit and the sage wisdom of our ancestors, our mothers, and our fathers. And we hope that you will like, subscribe, share, and tell others about this very important new program. I have been committed to making at least one episode a week that you can share. We cover the social, the political, the spiritual, economic issues confronting the African American community. And this week we have a tremendous show for you. I want to talk about why Lord Jamar is wrong, and why Fat Joe is wrong, and why the FBA is wrong. We're also going to hit on Vivek and Elon and why they're wrong. But we also want why they're all a little bit right. And so we've got an exciting show for you today. I want you to call a relative, call a friend, let them know that we're on. We're going to elevate your minds. We're going to lift you up. We're going to challenge you because what you hear on this program is not like what you're going to hear on the others. I wanted to start today by saying yesterday I was with the good Reverend Dr. Robert Waterman of the Antioch Baptist Church in Bedford-Stuyvesant. And I was so happy to be there with him and the Muslim community. It was a sad occasion of a funeral of an outstanding young man that I watched grow up and watched him evolve into a man in the last 25 years more from a distance. But even when I knew him daily, when I was minister of Mosque Number 7 in Harlem, he was a man child. He was a precocious young man, Kevin Muhammad, and he aspired to be a leader in that movement. And over the years, he achieved that goal. He passed at about 47 years of age, and which of course is very, very young. He was a family man. I'd spoken to him a couple of years ago. He was living in Detroit, and I always had the fondest regard for him. And so I could not miss his funeral and janazah service. And so I was very happy to be there yesterday and to see so many wonderful brothers and sisters, my Muslim brothers and sisters from the NOI. Many I had not seen in 25 years, 26, 27 years. And it was just a wonderful family reunion. And it was a sad occasion. His sons were there, his mom and dad, and his family members. But, you know, in the African American community, whether you're Baptist or Methodist or Congregational or Muslim, we have a sweet science to funerals. They are not simply funerals, which are sad occasions. They're paradoxical because not only are they funerals, but they're also send-offs into eternity. And I've been doing funerals for about 38 years, almost 40 years. And I have never seen a funeral and I've seen them so sad where the folk almost wanted to pull the deceased out of the casket. I've seen it. Oh, Daddy, oh! I've seen it all. I've never seen one that did not, the tears did not give away to joy at the repast. And certainly that was the case yesterday at the Antioch Baptist Church. And I will talk more about that at some point. And so I want to just send my condolences and my love and support and prayers to that family, the Muhammad family, and to all of the Abrahamic covenant in this season. I hope you've had a Merry Christmas if you are celebrating Christmas. Kwanzaa has started, and we are very, very happy to acknowledge Kwanzaa. You know, one of the things that you see online are people, mostly whites, but a lot of blacks too, who take pot shots at Kwanzaa simply because they don't understand. And some of the sites I follow, and I agree with, pardon me, some of their politics, they lean more toward a centrist politics, but even I saw them attacking Kwanzaa. And I write, and I'll be writing more and more to say, hey, wait a minute, don't attack our holidays, okay? Well, that's a man-made holiday by, Ron Everett. Well, you tell me a holiday that is not man-made by somebody. All holidays are man-made, okay? Even if the divine is the inspiration for the holiday, somebody had to say, hey, we're going to celebrate Christmas. Jesus didn't say it. Okay, somebody had to say we're going to celebrate whatever holiday you celebrate. Okay, so all holidays are man-made. Let's just get over that. Okay, Kwanzaa is not a religious holiday. It is not a made-up religious holiday, as some like to say. It is a cultural holiday, and African Americans in this country, we were cut off from our native land and our culture. We have a right to develop whatever cultural traditions we can recover, whatever cultural traditions we create, whichever cultural conditions or traditions are become an amalgam of our experience, we have an absolute right to do that. And Kwanzaa is one of those holidays. It is an amalgam of some of the important cultural traditions from East Africa, but it doesn't matter whether it's East Africa, West Africa. We are a Pan-African people. And so we have the right. I'm sorry, if you didn't want Kwanzaa, you shouldn't have cut us off from our native land. And maybe we would have just celebrated Nigerian festivals or Ghanaian or those who are from Cote d'Ivoire or Angola. We would have been that kind of people. But since you decided to bring us to this country, you did not keep records of where we came from. You did not teach us our native tongue. You put us all in a barrel together. You shook us up. And so we as a people are undoubtedly African. We're clearly African. You can just look at me and tell we're African, but we're Pan-African. In other words, we draw from the entirety of the globe. And I think that's what makes Black people in America special. And so we're in Kwanzaa season, and I think it's the second or third day of Kwanzaa. And so I want to acknowledge those who are observing Kwanzaa. It's important to teach your children the principles of the Nguza Saba. And yes, we thank Brother Karanga for giving us those principles. Well, he went to jail. Well, you know what? A whole lot of people went to jail. Malcolm went to jail, okay? A whole lot of people have been convicted of crimes, okay? A lot of liberals and some conservatives too. So we're not discouraged because someone has been convicted of a crime. He is a great historian. He is not a religious leader. He's a cultural leader, and we certainly appreciate Kwanzaa. And I think that's a perfect segue into our discussion today about this whole Lord Jamar versus Fat Joe versus FBA. I mean, you know, one of the wonderful things about my ministry is that, you know, I know all of these folks. I've known Brother Lord Jamar for many years. I just saw Lord Jamar this summer up in Martha's Vineyard. I have known him from my days in Harlem, also knew him and had close ties with him through the good folks in Westchester County, New York, between Mount Vernon and New Rochelle, and the many tethers and connections we have with each other, even in terms of on his wife's side. So he's a wonderful brother. I mean, he and Grand Poobah and my neighbor in Bed-Stuy, at least former neighbor, I think he's in Carolina now, Brother Sadat X. I love the Brand Nubians. Who doesn't love the Brand Nubians in terms of classic hip hop? They are one of the greats. And never forget my former neighbor in Harlem, Brother Alamo. Great group. My woman at the time produced, to me, one of their greatest albums. I might be a bit biased, but called The Foundation. So they have always been highly regarded by me as one of the rap groups that really elevated the thinking of young people during the golden age of hip hop, elevated the thinking of our people. And so, I've known Fat Joe as well. I knew Fat Joe when Fat Joe was not the star that he is today. I used to see him at Mosque number 7. He was Joey Crack. He was Fat Joe the Gangster. All of these iterations I've seen. I have not. I saw him briefly downtown about a year ago, last summer maybe, and I had not seen him in maybe 25 years. But the tentacles run deep. Some of his people, or I would say mentors, Brother B.O., one of the great leaders in the Zulu Nation. He and I were very close. I actually, before he was killed, I had brought him into the mosque, and he was processing and becoming a member of the NOI. And so, we have very deep connections, deep connections. Minister Arthur X, Arthur Muhammad now, formerly Arthur X, was a member of the Zulu Nation and a lieutenant in the mosque back in those days. He's the leader of the mosque now. And I had just these wonderful brothers who really connected me with all of these folks. And so I know these people, they're all good people. And I don't want to, I want to be clear about that. But I do think that Jamar and Joe and FBA, I don't know the leaders of FBA. Of course, I know of them. I have had my own battles, not so much with FBA, but with ADOS and their leader. And I didn't like how they all came after Brother X the other day, but he's a big boy, well able to fight back. And, but I hope to just raise some issues. And I think that's what I want to do tonight, because in 2024, it would seem to me that we don't need to be embroiled in this kind of battle. Black people, Black groups. Every one of the people that I've mentioned, particularly Lord Jamar and FBA, and we got to work on Brother Joe a bit. But he has, in his own way, contributed to the elevation of our urban communities. And so I don't think that any of us should be fighting with each other. That to me undermines all the good work that each group is doing. Now, what are the issues? Here are the issues. Number one, Lord Jamar made a point, and FBA has sort of driven this, sort of raised this, in some ways, a legitimate issue, in some, this issue of foundational Black Americans, okay? Foundational Black Americans are people who trace their ancestry to the American South. And I mean, 90% of Blacks before the 19th century, 18th century lived in the South, okay? 90% of Blacks lived in the South, even as late as the early 20th century, okay? Now, of course, there's always been a long tradition of free Blacks in places like Boston, Philadelphia, New York City, but that was an infinitesimal percentage of Black people. 90% of Black people lived in the South until the Great Migration, okay? And so foundational Black Americans are those who are descendants of slaves, okay? Those who were enslaved in the South. But, while it's a legitimate issue to raise, when you look at the steady stream of immigrants that come into America today, it's not so legitimate an issue to raise when you look at the long road, look down the long road of history. Because the great genius of the African American community is that we are really, truly, the full range of the African diaspora. I mean, when you think about Black people in America, what has made us greater? And when I say greater, I don't mean we're fundamentally greater or morally greater or ethically greater or more special in the eyes of God than people in Nigeria or people in Djibouti or people in Jamaica or Barbados. But in terms of our reach, in terms of our impact on global culture, just as America in 248 years rose up from nothing and has eclipsed the older nations of the earth and become the greatest nation on the earth, the Black people in America, we have had the greatest reach because we came up in this context, okay? And the other reason why our story has been so impacting on the world, the other reason why we have been so great is that in truth, we are not a people from any particular country. We are not merely Nigerians, though many of us are Nigerians. We are not merely Ghanaians, though many of us are Ghanaians. We're not merely Angolans, though many of us trace our lineage to these places. We're not simply any one particular people. We are a people who are Pan-African. Now, that's something that our brothers in FBA just have to understand. If you don't understand that, I'm sorry. I don't know how you could not understand that. That's basic. Okay, we are a pan African people. Our great figures come from throughout the diaspora, and I don't know if you can go back to a place and time when you could say, okay, Black people before this time never came from anywhere else. In fact, most Blacks don't even understand that the triangular slave trade took Africans from the African continent. Most of them went to Brazil and were dropped off. The second largest group were dropped off in the Caribbean. Only about 7 to 12% of Africans that were taken from Africa were brought to the United States. We are the smallest number percentage-wise, but again, because we were brought to a young nation, a young dynamic nation that destiny had its hands on, our reach has been greater than any other people. I got comments coming in. Brent W. says, Fat Joe is canceled. He has a story. Okay, fine. He's canceled. Well, just listen to me. EP says Harlem versus Brooklyn. Okay, I don't know. You have to say more about that. I don't understand what you mean by that, okay? Peace, Brother Conrad. The truth is being revealed. Yes, sir. That's what I'm trying to do. So what I'm saying is, if you look at DuSable, who founded the city of Chicago, he was not what you would call a foundational Black American. He wasn't on a plantation in Mississippi or Georgia. And so, I mean, and you can go down the annals of history of Black people, and you will always see that the story of the African American, the story of Black people in America, is a Pan-African and Pan-Caribbean story. And that's something that we've got to accept. Now, what Lord Jamar is talking about in terms of the founding of hip hop culture, okay? And this is an important point. And you have to really be a certain age to understand what he's talking about, okay? See, I'm 60 years old, okay? If you're in your 20s or 30s, if you grew up, you were born in the 80s, or if you were born in the 2000s or 90s, you probably don't even understand this. And what Lord Jamar is saying, what I think he's right about, is that it's undisputable or indisputable that hip hop culture is an amalgam, okay? It's an amalgam of the influences of soul music, of R&B music. The great DJs were able to draw from folk music, obscure cuts from Europe, Asia, India. And so, but the culture itself developed in the inner city of New York City. Most notably, most recognized the Bronx, but Brooklyn had its own contribution to the culture. What Lord Jamar is saying is that it was Black American culture, okay? And the pushback against that is, well, how could that be? Kool Herc is clearly Jamaican, okay? He has proclaimed that. Bambaataa is clearly from the West Indies. Many others had Latin American roots, and they clearly contributed to hip hop. So how can what Lord Jamar be saying be correct? What he's saying be correct? Here's how what he's saying is correct. When he says that, yes, I will acknowledge there were people from various islands that were involved in the creation of hip hop, but they were not promoting the cultures from the islands that they came from. And you have to be a particular age to understand that. I grew up in the 70s, 80s, okay? And I had many friends, okay, in New York and Washington, D.C. I did not even know they were Caribbean coming up. I remember one day I was walking with my good friend, brother by the name of Joe LaFont. I should have known. It should have been obvious. I didn't see Joe or recognize him as anything other than a Black boy like myself. And one day we were walking down the street. We went to a corner store. He saw an elderly man, and he jumped into, for me, what was a strange language, and they began to talk. And after he finished talking to the elder, I said, man, what language, what were you saying? What language was that? He just kind of brushed it off. That's my grandfather, he said. What I later learned, and now that I have a better understanding, Joe was obviously Haitian. One of my great friends, one of the greatest basketball players in Washington, D.C. public school history, UDC, two-time All-American, great coach, great man in the community, Lyndon DeBellet. We never talked about the fact that he was from Trinidad. His family was from Trinidad. Merv Daniels. I knew people from the Caribbean, but in those days, many people who were from the Caribbean did not necessarily lift that up, because in those days, assimilation was the deal, okay? And so it wasn't until, and this is where I think Lord Jamar is probably correct, because the people who came to America from other cities, and I later learned that many of the people I knew at every level of the social strata, okay, from the middle class, the affluent, to those in poverty, many of them had Caribbean parentage, but they just didn't talk about it in those days, because those first and second generation immigrants were fully integrated into America. And Black culture was the dominant culture in the world in the 70s and 80s. The explosion of Black consciousness, Black awareness, the Black is beautiful culture that came out of this city, starting in the 50s and 60s by Kwame and Alambe Brathwaite, two sons of Barbados. They gave us Black is Beautiful. They gave us the Grandasser models. They gave us that great expression that became so popular and became the dominant culture. And of course, you had James Brown and Muhammad Ali and these figures who were foundational Black Americans, to use that term. And people all over the world were impacted by American culture because we had come into our own. We had come to a place where we were affirming who we are. And I would go so far to say that not one country in the world has yet had the kind of cultural explosion and Black awareness and affirmation that Black people in America have had. And in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, if you were around the world, you identified with American culture. But here's what happened. And I think this is what I'd like to see Lord Jamar not be dogmatic and recognize. Just because you're right, the style that they were bringing was largely African-American style. It was urban style. It was New York style. But just because they were not affirming their culture yet, and I would say that hip hop is really the greatest vehicle that helped African Americans, or people we assume to be African Americans, in places like New York and Philadelphia and Washington and wherever you had Miami, where you have a large Bahamian community. It was the rappers that began to affirm and shout out many of these Caribbean countries. And then the young people, rather than being ashamed of being from Trinidad or Barbados or from Haiti, when they began to see the rappers during the golden age of hip hop, when they took off the gold chains and put on the African medallions, when people like Just Ice and others began to big up and rep the Caribbean and places they were from, young people got a great degree of confidence from that, and they began to celebrate the fact that they were from a Caribbean background. And from that affirmation in hip hop, there has been an explosion of people who, hey, they're proud to be from the Caribbean. And why shouldn't they be? And why should Black people in America? Now, I do agree with FBA. When a discussion of reparations takes place in this country, there would have to be some cutoff point. Okay, there has to be some cutoff point, because if you step to the United States government and say Black descendants of slaves deserve reparations, clearly, just because you're Black and you immigrated yesterday, you would not be party to those reparations. That's a sticky point. That's a very complex conversation. And at some point, that will have to be discussed. And I agree that just for accuracy's sake and historic sake, you would have to say, okay, did your ancestors, were they enslaved in America? And what FBA gets terribly wrong is that many Blacks who were on the plantations in the South had come here from the Caribbean. So again, let's not forget. Let's not forget. We are all, as Kwame Ture would say, an African people. Okay? Just because we are not in Africa does not mean that we are not Africans. And that's what people have to understand. Okay. Dude, FBA is another grift. All due respect. Well, I won't call them a grift, but I'll say they got some things right, but they've got a lot wrong. EP says vice versa. Jamaicans and Rastafarians influence hip hop in New York to be more Black, along with South African movement. You're absolutely right. And let me just say, EP, let's not forget the influence. Black soul music influenced reggae. Black American soul music influenced reggae. In fact, Bob Marley and many of the great Rastafarian artists, they imitated the Motown groups. Okay, and then of course, by the time hip hop comes into form, along with the Caribbean rappers who celebrated the Caribbean heritage, reggae's influence on hip hop was great. The other thing that you have to remember is that by the time hip hop really begins to take shape in the mid 1970s to the late 1970s, two things were happening. Number one, the Nation of Islam was rising again. Okay, and obviously, when you talk about the nation, which had a tremendous impact upon the hip hop movement. Okay. And many people don't recognize that or understand that. But it was a sort of a coinciding of factors. As the minister was rebuilding the nation, hip hop was developing, and people like Bambaataa were greatly influenced. Okay. All of these young people who had been in gangs in New York City, they used to go to the mosque and listen to the minister, and he had a great impact upon them in the 70s. And so when he stood back up in 78, by 1980, 81, and then of course by 1985, once again, the nation was impacting the African-American community and hip hop in a significant way. And how can you talk about that influence of the nation when two of its most prominent ministers have Caribbean roots? Minister Louis Farrakhan, whose father was Jamaican, his mother from St. Kitts. Malcolm X, who, like many African Americans, Black folks, before we got into this foundational Black American ADOS, Malcolm's Black Georgia father, Earl Little, married his wife Louise, who was from Grenada. And so listen, when you go back into the Harlem Renaissance, when you go back into Black history, how can we be a people without the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey? How can we be a people without Shirley Chisholm, without Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture? And so all of these things that we are talking about today, they should be recognized as facts of history, but they should not be divisive. That should not divide us from each other. This is not an either or proposition. We are a people in America that cannot claim to any particular place. Thank God for DNA now. We can go and have DNA tests, and we can figure out where exactly we're from in Africa, okay? And that's a great thing. We could not do that for 200 maybe 25 years. I think that technology is only about 25 years old. Most of our time here in America, and obviously before America, so more like 400 years, we didn't know where we came from. We just knew we came from Africa. And that actually became a strength for us, because where Africans on the continent recognize their tribal, their national origins, and their identity revolves around their language, their ethnic groups, their tribal groups, their family groups, their national identity. That's not true of Black people in America. We had the broadest vision of Africa. We had the broadest idea of the diaspora, because we did not know where we came from in Africa. We knew we were African, and therefore we claimed all of Africa. And that has worked out for us in a way that has allowed us to embrace people who were obviously originally from Africa, but came through the Caribbean. And whether it's Jamaica, Barbados, whether it is Grenada, I mean, you name it. You go down the list, Trinidad. I mean, some of our great leaders in New York City, Peter Noel, the great writer, Roy Innes of CORE. I mean, you listen, I don't want to name names because it's impossible to name the people who are from the Caribbean or from various parts of Africa that have come to this city and made a great impact on the Black community. It is almost sacrilege to divide Black people according to national origin, because all of us are African. Nobody's born No, we're born in New Rochelle, but we are an African born in New Rochelle. We're born in Brazil, but we're an African born in Brazil. And once you understand that, okay, once we get settled on that, yes, Muskegon Tribune says, yeah, but the messenger was from Sandersville, Georgia. Of course he was. But, you know, what difference does that make? When you look at the leadership of the Black community, and he was influenced by Marcus Garvey, who came from the Caribbean. Okay. So, I mean, listen, we cannot, brothers and sisters, it's okay to look at where people come from. It's okay to analyze that, but it's really foolish for us to act as though we are fundamentally a different people because we come from the Caribbean or we come from Brazil, Central or South America. If you can trace your lineage to Africa, we're all the same. Now, yes, there are cultural differences. And I think where I agree with Lord Jamar and where I would challenge, yes, and you're right, Muskegon Tribune, you're absolutely right. Garvey was influenced by Booker T. Washington. So that's what I'm trying to show you is cyclical. And you really can't go to the beginning because, first of all, there's no such thing as a Black people that originated in the American South. We were brought to the American South, okay? And so all of those people came from somewhere, and most of them came from, again, only 6 to 12% came directly from Africa, and many came through the Caribbean, okay? And so you're right. I think the tentacles would absolutely, if you look at them, they would show just how connected we are. But I think one of the great points that Lord Jamar makes is that I like to see all people of the earth recognize and be able to give credit to African Americans for the great things that we have done. The other thing that I want us to understand, Muskegon Tribune says the FBA position is that there were Blacks here prior to slavery. I understand that. Of course, that is up for debate. Yes, they came before Columbus. I understand that. Okay, all of that is fine. But at the end of the day, my evidence and where I am situated is that we are an African people. Okay, and so if we all came to America, okay, from somewhere, we came from Africa through somewhere. I'm settled on the fact that we're an African people. And what I would like for folks who are immigrants to do, and I teach at City College of New York, and one of the great joys for me, I teach a civil rights course, and I teach a Black Power course, and I have a lot of students who are immigrants, and they're from Africa, they're from Asia, they're from Europe, and one of the things that people, particularly recent immigrants. Now, of course, if your grandparents migrated to the United States in the 20s or the 1900s or migrated here in the 30s, then you've had the full American experience, okay? But I'm talking about recent immigrants. I'm talking about people who come to this country and make the assumption that African Americans are shiftless, lazy, trifling, and therefore they come and the world opens up to them, and they just don't want to associate with African American people. That's foolish. And one of the wonderful things that I love about teaching that civil rights class is to break up that mentality, to show the brothers and sisters who are immigrants and people from other countries that the most heroic story of Black people anywhere in the history of the world is the story of Black people in this country who have gone, as Reverend Jesse Jackson eloquently and famously said, from slave ships to championships. All right, from the outhouse to the courthouse to the state house to the White House. You're never going to find you can't even go back to Greek mythology and find a more heroic a story than the story of African American people in this country. But don't kid yourself. That's not a story where you can delineate African people that were born in America from African people born in the Caribbean or born in other parts of Central and South America. We are an amalgam, and that's just something we have to recognize. So I hope many of you can get over that. We have to acknowledge as Black Americans that our story is not void of people of Caribbean heritage. It's not void of people who have contributed to our story and made our story what it is. Okay, Sidney Poitier. I mean, you just go down the list. I mean, you can't separate our people. Can't separate us out. So let's stop trying. Okay. Now let me get to Fat Joe for a minute. All right. I'm gonna look at some of these comments later. They're moving so fast. This guy has lost his hell. Some so-called Black people were already here in America. They didn't. Okay. All right. Okay, brother. That's fine. You're not the first to say that. Okay. That's okay. But can you trace your lineage to them? Do you have any cultural context for those people? Do we have any written history? Do we have any oral tradition of how those people impacted us today? So if that's true, then that's up for discussion as well. But what we do know is that starting in the 15th century, there was a triangular slave trade that brought Blacks here and took them to Brazil and the Caribbean. And they all were brought from Africa. And so that means we are, and you know, the sad thing about this, we debated this 70 years ago. I mean, our grandparents, again, Kwame and Alambe Brathwaite were talking about this along with Carlos Cooks in the 50s, okay? Mr. Muhammad started teaching in the 30s about the universality of the Black man and woman. And yet we are, another generation is having these kind of foolish conversations about whether we're African or not. And I've actually heard people in the FBA say we're not African. And I will remind you what Brother Malcolm X said. When Black people in the 40s and 50s and the 30s, in their desire to assimilate into white American culture, they would say, I'm not African. They would pierce their lips. You couldn't even say the word Africa in many of the churches, with the exception of our great African Methodist Episcopal Church, which was the first church in this country founded on a racial schism. They fully understood that they were Africans and had missions to Africa long before many other people understood that. And when Malcolm would address those folks back then, when they would say, I haven't left anything in Africa. This is what some of the FBA people are saying. I ain't left nothing in Africa. You don't connect me to Africa. Malcolm would say, why you left your mind in Africa. Okay. He said, why you left your mind in Africa. He said, a cat can have kittens in an oven, but that doesn't make them biscuits. Okay. And that, of course, was at a time when Blacks did not have basic civil rights in this country. I am an African American. I am unapologetically an African American, okay? And I lay claim to all of the people in the Black community, our ancestors that fought, the first indentured Africans that came here in 1619. And when they changed the laws in 1660 to put them in chattel slavery forever, first time ever in the history of the world, people were enslaved based upon their race, and their descendants would be enslaved. and all of the blacks that came here prior to 1619. But I'm with our ancestors because they fought through chattel slavery. They fought through discrimination, post-Civil War, Reconstruction era, the 100-year night of darkness, and the heroic and courageous civil rights and Black Power movement that kicked down the doors and established in America the Public Accommodations Bill in 64, Voting Rights Act in 65, Fair Housing Act in 68. And at every level of agitation, we have forced this country to recognize us. And I do believe that there's one more mountain to climb. And I do believe that the original sin of the United States of America can't fully be resolved until reparations are paid to those who are due. And that means people who were descendants of slavery here in this country. The American government would owe that, just like the French would owe the Haitians, the British would owe those who were underneath their slavery. And so this is my view on these things. I'm trying to read some of these comments. This is New York City, not playing them down south country games up here. I don't know. Shiesty, I don't know what you mean by that, but please share more. Because even though this is New York City, brother, let me tell you something. 90% of Black people are from the South. And so that means your relatives, they didn't get here before 1900, okay? They didn't get to Harlem before 1901, 2, and 3. And it was because of a man named Philip Payton that opened up the rental properties in Harlem for Black people. Now, there were a few, there were a few up in Nova Scotia. There were a few in Boston, David Walker and others. There were a few in New York City and Philadelphia. Again, those cities have a long history of free Blacks, okay? But, we all are largely a agrarian and Southern people because that's where the majority population of Blacks were. And I don't know about you. You're from Brooklyn, yeah, but let me tell you something. Most Black people I know in New York City are either from South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, or the Caribbean, okay? So you haven't been here that long. You haven't been here that long to separate yourself from where your ancestors came from, okay? Because the South trying to say they created hip hop. Well, I'm not interested in that. To me, that's not a significant, that's not an earth-shattering question in terms of Black people. I think everyone knows that hip hop came from New York City, but hip hop, again, borrowed from the music of people like James Brown from Augusta, Georgia. So, I mean, come on, man, this is the whole point of the message. Now, let me get on Fat Joe right quick. I love Joe. Okay, I know Joe. I think he's a good person. But I'm going to get on New York about this too. I spent a lot of time in New York growing up, okay? My first cousins moved from 132nd Street. My cousin Maury Winkler, he's an long-term entertainment lawyer in New York City. And they moved to Manhattan. I mean, they moved from Harlem in the mid to late 1970s to Manhattan Plaza. And so they were Plaza kids. I was a Plaza kid. Whatever they hung out and did, I did. They're like my brothers. So we're more brothers than cousins. And so one of the issues I always had here in New York was how the N-word was used so freely, so loosely by people of every culture. I mean, I got into more fights of people of other races using the N-word. And even today, when I'm on the subway and I hear young Black children and Spanish children, people from other races running off the N-word the way they do, sometimes I want to snatch them and give them a history lesson, if you know what I mean. New York, you made a big mistake. And you are the ones that gave people the right to say the N-word. You said, well, Puerto Ricans and blacks and Dominicans, we all come up together, so it's okay if they say the N-word. See, that was your mistake, Lord Jamar. You should have checked that 50 years ago. You should have stuck with the teachings of Clarence 13X. You should have stuck with the teachings of the early great hip-hop rappers like Rakim Allah. They didn't use the N-word. They used brother and sister. And when we got away from that, and in the 70s, and when people of every race were allowed to use that word, and then you come up with some kind of foolish rationalization. Tribe Called Quest had a song that just said that word over and over again. Then Tupac tried to come up with a rationalization. Well, it's not Nigger, it's Nigga. It doesn't make a difference. When you allow people to use that word, okay, hold on one second. Shiesty says, Brother Conrad, with all due respect, this New York City, we're not going to stop saying it. And you continue to be an ignorant fool. You continue to be a fool. Just because it's New York City doesn't mean you can't be a fool. Because there's not a people on the earth that allow other people to use. You can't go into a Jewish community and use a derogatory term. Shiesty. Go down to Borough Park and do it and see how far you get in New York City. If it's so New York, go to Williamsburg. Let me hear you say it in Williamsburg. You won't do it. So don't brag about ignorance, okay? Many people in New York have tried to erase and eradicate that ignorance, okay? Then you get mad when somebody like Fat Joe that grew up in the South Bronx, hearing it, you let him say it his whole life. And then when he starts to say it and checks you, then you try to get mad and say that he's doing something wrong. He is doing something wrong, okay? Because I don't hear people, those same blacks that allow Latinos to use the derogatory N-word, I don't ever hear you using a derogatory word to describe Latin people. And you know they exist. And so my question is, when are black people will stop fighting each other over foolishness? Stop dumping on each other. Stop trying to delineate between somebody. All of them came from Ghana or the Ivory Coast. Some of them got dropped off in Brazil. Some of them got dropped off in Barbados. Some of them got dropped off in Trinidad. And some of them got dropped off in America. And instead of us delineating and worrying about the differences between those people, what we need to do is stop allowing ourselves to be the butt of jokes. What we need to do is come out of ignorance. We spent so much time in the 80s, and people before us spent time in the 60s and the 70s trying to wake us up, and we fell back into ignorance. Yes, Tupac took you back into ignorance. Yes, Biggie took you back into ignorance. And if we don't come out of that ignorance, and not just them, but a whole bunch of folks in hip hop, we will never be respected. I don't care if you're on Fifth Avenue in New York, you'll always be looked at as the dumb N-word that can't get his story right. And so we need to stop this foolishness. We need to dedicate ourselves. You can't make a song about you using the N-word the entire song and then get mad at some white kid in Scarsdale because they're singing it. You sound like a fool. If it's so derogatory, then you need to stop saying it. You need to take it out of your lyrics. You need to show that it's disrespectful to your people. You need to show that your dignity takes you above that kind of insulting language. And when you do that, other people will do it. That's always the issue with black folks, okay? People will not respect you until you respect yourself. When we respect ourselves, other people will respect us. As long as we engage in division, people will always exploit that. Nature abhors a vacuum. And when black people aren't divided, when the young hip hoppers took delight in trying to criticize people like Reverend Butts and C. Dolores Tucker, thank you, Muskegon, and myself and others. When the young people took delight in sticking it to people like Percy Sutton, the great owner of WBLS, that for a time wouldn't play rap music. None of these folks who had fought through the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s would acknowledge rap music because it was destroying all of the work that they had done. And they did it from the West Coast. And at one point in New York didn't even use the N-word in rap. But because California sold more records, because the West Coast rappers who did not have the historical context of knowledge the way the New York rappers did, then you start following them. You start wearing Pendletons and start wearing Croker sacks and start braiding your hair and wearing it long, just trying to get on, no longer creative, no longer setting the trends, but following people. And until we get back to that consciousness and become a light to people in the world, there's no sense in you arguing with Fat Joe. And Fat Joe, you need to stop it, okay? You need to stop it because you know there are derogatory terms for Spanish people, and you don't hear Black people using those terms. And I know you've been miseducated. I know your entire upbringing in New York, that's all you hear the kids say, nigga, 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 yo, nigga, yo, nigga. That's got to stop, okay? And if you chiefs, you older rappers, you people with influence, Lord Jamar, if you want to impact culture, then you and some of the old school brothers get together and say, we need to put a stop to this mess that we created. Because let me tell you something about all of these rappers. They act real bad around Black people. There's always a threat about killing somebody or shooting somebody, or I'm going to hurt somebody. They don't do that when they get around the white folks in the music industry. When you see them out in the Hamptons, when you see them with the big money people, they're as intelligent and reasonable as any human being could possibly be. And so we need to stop this stuff. It is destroying our people, and you would have thought we had overcome that. And now we're right back in that kind of foolishness. Now, let me just say a word. This whole thing, Vivek and Elon Musk, because this is a part of all of this, okay? This is a part, the whole immigrant conversation in this country. And let me say this, America is a nation of immigrants, and that's a fact, okay? Leroy Brown says this end is stuck in 1995. No, I'm not stuck in 95. I don't know what you mean by that, but it seems like most rappers and most people like you are stuck in 1930, 1920, in the Step and Fetch It days, okay? At least when Step and Fetch It would get off the movie set, he would put on a dignified suit and carry himself like a man. He didn't carry that. That role was something he only played in the movies. So some of you guys, you doing worse than Step and Fetch It, and Sister Butterfly McQueen, and Farina, and what's that boy on The Little Rascals? Buckwheat, yeah. Some of you cats look like and act like you just fell off the back of a turnip truck. You talking about the South? Well, you're the one walking around with your pants down and underwear up to your waist, like they did in the South when they didn't have belts and they had to work hard on the fields. That didn't come from Rikers Island. That came from North Carolina, South Carolina, Mississippi, and Alabama. And you walking around Brooklyn with that look today. You walking around in the Bronx with that look today. So if you say I'm stuck in 1985, you're stuck in 1900. Gumby, damn it, says, sorry, brother Conrad, delineation of Black America is already done. You will have to get used to this new paradigm. No, I won't. Let me tell you something, brother. When you've been around a long time, you've seen a lot of passing fancies, okay? I have seen so many passing fancies when it comes to African-American consciousness. So no, in life, only the classics, only the finest things last. And no matter what your teacher or leader has taught you, you cannot separate African Americans from Blacks from the Caribbean and Africa. So that's just not possible. You can't do it. So you can do it in your mind, but a real evidentiary based examination of the historical facts cannot change that. And it doesn't matter how many of you have found FBA, okay? Most of you, your Black consciousness is a mile wide and an inch deep. And I'm grateful that Tariq Nasheed and others are teaching you some Black consciousness. But Black consciousness is nothing if all it does is divide you from other Black people. The goal of the Black movement and the genius of the Black American experience. See, let me just finish this point on this point. People talk about the color line in this country. And one of the great things about, I say great, it was wickedly great, but one of the great things about slavery in America was that they had a one drop rule, okay? And that rule was that no matter who you were as a Black person, no matter what your color was, hair texture, you could be the masses' son or daughter. You could be light, bright, and damn near white. You could be so light, but if you had one drop of Black blood, you were considered a Black person and subject to the same treatment of other Black people. If you couldn't pass, now there were some that could pull it off and they passed, but that wasn't that many people because it's not that many, okay, percentage-wise, that could actually achieve that. But everybody else, you were treated the same. Now, in the French Caribbean, that wasn't so. In other parts of the world, in South Africa during apartheid, they had Blacks and coloreds, a little different ethnicity. The point I'm making is, don't you see the genius of the Black American experience? That no matter what color you weren't in a different category. There was no cafe au lait, okay? There was no mixed race. There were no octoroons. You had them, but they still fell under Black, the status of being Blacks, subject to Jim Crow, subject to all of the discrimination that Black people were subjected to. And that made our community stronger. That's how we could produce a Dr. Charles Drew. That's how we could produce people on the color spectrum. Adam Clayton Powell, one of the baddest brothers and the blackest brothers who ever lived. And he looked white. And the same is true with national origin. It didn't matter if you came up from the Caribbean and you moved to the Bronx and you grew up in the Bronx, whether you were Colin Powell, General Colin Powell, or Lambe Braff that grew up in the same neighborhood in the Bronx, you were considered Black. And what was really a very broad, wide net that they threw around the Black community, the mere fact that as Black as Lambe Braff was, and as light as Colin Powell was, one from Barbados, one from Jamaica, it didn't matter. You are considered Black. And if you're considered black, and it doesn't matter how light you are, how dark, or what country you come from, that stitched us and knitted us together as a people and made us the envy of the black world. If you go to Black Britain today, they look up to black Americans. Nobody's had a cultural revolution the way we have. If you go to Francophone countries, they have to look up to us because the way we have impacted the world is quite different than blacks anywhere in the world. And that was only done with our unity. Brother Larry Brown says this kind of babbling is going to try to waste a lot of our time. Well, I'm glad you consider it babbling, but I guarantee you, if you think about what I'm saying, and you know, let me say this. Those of you who are in FBA, you know, look, there's nothing wrong with being in an organization, but you have to learn to be a critical thinker, okay? Many of the people in FBA are from the South. Many of them are from the West Coast. And many of them grew up in areas where there was not a lot of ethnic diversity. They don't even understand what it means to grow up in a black, ethnically diverse community. They've never lived in a place like the Bronx, where on one corner you got African immigrants, on another corner you got Caribbean immigrants, on the next corner you have Spanish immigrants, on the next corner you got blacks from South Carolina, but they all live in the same community. And the children eventually mesh all of those cultures together. And so if you grew up somewhere where you didn't encounter African people growing up, or you did not encounter black people from the Caribbean, and you have this sort of, I would consider it an ignorant, sort of xenophobic, narrow view about blackness, then you got to study. I'm happy that you're awakened. I mean, you could be in the Bloods and Crips, and I'm very happy that you decided to join FBA, but not the Bloods and the Crips. But if you're going to divide the black community like the Bloods and the Crips, then you might as well join the Bloods and the Crips because you're doing the same thing. And so I appeal to the leaders of that group. I appeal to them to try to educate their followers, to lift them up. And followers, you have to do some independent study because there's no way in the world an intelligent person can do an assessment of the black community in the United States and not see that it is a diverse community that was greatly impacted by not only the Pan-African scene, but also the Pan-Caribbean scene. And if you can't get that, then just keep on living. Listen to me. It's December the 28th, 2025. And I guarantee you, Larry Brown, I guarantee you some of the others that are just zealots, okay? I guarantee you on this day, 10 years from now, you will have a different perspective, okay? So I'm not going to get angry at you, your insults. You came at Sadat X and Sadat shot you down. I've had differences with you before, but you're my brothers and sisters. I love you. And I'm going to, every time I open my mouth, I'm going to try to help you to understand why you don't box yourself in. You expand the circumference of your information. And therefore, you expand the diameter of your wisdom. A. Hill says, I grew up in New York. My maternal and paternal grandparents migrated to New York from Georgia. There was not Caribbean and African unification in their day or mine. I grew up in the 70s. Well, let me just say this to you. I find that very difficult when I know plenty of people from the 1970s. My own children are the grandchildren of a couple who married in the 60s, and the grandfather was born in the Bronx, a first-generation American immigrant from Barbados, and their grandmother is from South Carolina. So what are you talking about? Okay, it doesn't seem to make sense. Colin Powell was born in Jamaica. His wife wasn't. Okay, let's go down the list. There are many people who have what are called culturally mixed marriages. Okay, but Black people did not think about that in areas where there were large numbers of people from the Caribbean or from Africa. Although I will acknowledge that most of them spent most of their time in the 60s and the 70s trying to assimilate the way most immigrants do. And so I hope we can reason together. What's my point? Gumby, damn it. What's my point? My point is that why would a Black person, this is really the simple proposition, why would a person who knows that their descendants are from West Africa, that were taken on ships, some dropped off in Brazil, some dropped off in Haiti, some dropped off in Trinidad, Barbados, okay, and some in America, okay? Why would a person that knows that Africa's the root argue with people about the oneness of that people? And so I don't understand. Maybe there's something maybe you're heavier than Malcolm. Maybe you're heavier than Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael. I don't know. I've yet to see the evidence of that. Native American Reading said the most honorable Elijah Muhammad built a vision beyond the immediate struggles. You're absolutely right. We're aware that we're Africans. Culture is what divides us. We tried to be one. We beg all Africans to accept us. We finally respect ourselves enough. And I'm not mad at that. Musk 360. Listen, I am not mad at that. But what I don't understand about Black people is that why do we, I've never heard any other people talk like this. Why are we always worried about whether people respect us? When you respect yourself, do you know it doesn't make a damn bit of difference to me what an FBA member thinks about me, what an FBA member's mama thinks about me, okay? It doesn't matter to me what a white person thinks, what an Indian, a Chinese, it doesn't matter. I know myself. I am comfortable, confident, loving of my Black self. I don't care if my own children, what they think about me. I don't care what my neighbor thinks about me. And so when we get to a place as Black people, when you truly love yourself, you don't walk around with insecurity or a chip on your shoulder. I know some people don't respect us, but guess what? That's their ignorance. I'm telling you, the more you know about African American people and our struggle in this country, there's no people on earth. I know the Vietnamese have a great history. I know the Chinese have a great history. I know the Asians have a great history across the Pan-Asian continent. I know Africans have a great history on the continent. But as I said to you, the most heroic, dynamic, most interesting story of any people on the earth is the story of Black people in the United States. This is not a disrespect to Black people in the Caribbean. There's some great history and lineage in the Caribbean, great history and lineage in Central and South America. But when you look by and large at the historical impact Black Americans have had, the iconic figures that we produced that transform the world and cultures around the world, nobody has a greater story. I would put our story up against the Italian Renaissance, the ancient Hellenic culture. And so once you know that, then stop worrying about what people think about you. This whole situation shows Black Americans don't care what anyone, including you, thinks. Well, you know what? You know, you cannot care. You can put your head in the sand, but the truth is the light. Caribbean and Latinos were already in New York City in the 70s. Hip hop was built on the FBA musical roots, but hip hop was made by New York City youth who lacked instruments and made a gumbo soup genre. That's fine. I don't think anybody's arguing with that. That's great. But hip hop is not culture. It's a subculture of Black culture. And that's something we got to teach as well, because too many people who have grown up on hip hop, people who are now 50, 60, and 70 years old, hip hop is not a religion. Hip hop is not something that you should worship. Hip hop cannot console you in the deepest depths of life. Yes, it's important, but let me tell you something. To those of you who worship hip hop, all you got to do is go down to that federal lockup in Brooklyn and see where hip hop and hip hop culture has brought R. Kelly and Sean P. Diddy Combs. And so I'm tired of this worship of hip hop. Hip hop is something Black people produced. It's one of the chapters of Black history and Black greatness and Black culture. It is not a culture in and of itself. And we need to understand that. And so that young people will stop living their whole lives within the context of Cardi B and Benzino and Sexy Red and being ratchet. We need to teach our young people about who they are and give them some alternatives. So when they look at Cardi B, they can also look at Madam C.J. Walker. They can also look at Constance Baker Motley. They can have some alternatives that they can emulate and imitate. That's what we need to start doing. So don't really send me over. Don't send me over talking about, I'm not going to argue with you that hip hop was founded in New York City. That's great. And guess what else? It's the only music that Black people have ever produced that was not born in the religious experience or in the church experience. And therefore, that's the reason why it is void of the enriching power. That's why it has devolved. That's why it was very malleable in the hands of a vicious, demonic music industry that has destroyed the values of our young people, destroyed their pride and their consciousness and their sense of right and wrong. And so I love hip hop and I've been around it since the 70s, okay? But I'm not going to let anybody stand up and lift up hip hop as though it is some, it's on par or in and of itself Black culture. It is not. We don't like to be imposed on. No one will allow people to come to their country and identify as them without a relationship with them. Well, I agree with that. But my point is, if you live in a diverse community, you would find those commonalities, okay? Because again, we're all African people, all right? We'll give Latinos 1%. All right. Well, I don't know what percent you will give them, but I think, obviously they were there. Obviously they were part of the culture, but Lord Jamar is really correct. This really was. See, I remember, they have a picture floating around with Fat Joe, and he had a long hair in those days. See, when you see most Puerto Ricans and Dominicans today, because of hip hop, just like young white people, all young people dress the same today, okay? A guy could be from Brooklyn, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Arizona. You can't tell, okay? They all look the same hairstyle, same clothes. I remember when Puerto Rican young people in New York wore the kind of hairstyle that Joe has on that picture, when Blacks wore afros and Caesars. Okay, hip hop brought folks together, okay? So you don't see the DA anymore. You see many of the Puerto Rican youngsters, they're indistinguishable from the Black youngsters, but so are the white kids from Joliet, Illinois. Hip hop has done that, and that's a good thing, because ultimately it's about bringing folks together. I got a few more minutes. Jay Henry Hill says, I am Black Afro-Latino. I was around in those days, and I would be breakdancing with you. Not with no Italians. That's true. That is true. And of course, I'm not making the argument that Black people did not unite. I know Crazy Legs and all of those brothers. Okay, they were a part of that culture. Okay, but all I'm simply saying is, you know, what Lord Jamar is simply saying is Black people created the culture. And I hope I cleared it up because, yes, most people probably didn't even know the Caribbean heritage of some of those that were in the Bronx or in Brooklyn until they began to proclaim that. And if you were around hip hop in the 80s, you remember when the flags started appearing. You remember when young people from the Caribbean began to take pride in being from the Caribbean. Because when I was growing up in the 70s, we were ignorant as Black Americans, and we were not the broadest people. We were not as embracing of other cultures, even within our own family. And we could be vicious. People would be called monkey chasers. I remember when the AIDS scandal started, and people were very cruel to the Haitian people. My sister-in-law is Haitian. My brother's been married 25 years to a Haitian woman. We're a family. And so I don't want us to waste our time in this foolishness. That's one thing that FBA, I think you're onto something with the foundational Black Americans. If it's about standing up for us and declaring our importance and the uniqueness of our experience, I'm with that, okay? But you have to acknowledge, just because it's a historical fact, and you can be historical revisionist if you want. There's no Black story without Marcus Garvey, okay? There's no Black story. There's no heroic Black story without Shirley Chisholm, okay? There's no heroic Black story without Roy Innes, Constance Baker Motley. And there's no heroic Black story without Kwame Ture, okay? I mean, without Minister Louis Farrakhan, without Malcolm X. I mean, so what are we talking about? What are we really talking about? Okay, it's almost insanity. And so I'm just your brother, and you say the only thing we're going to agree on is talk to your boy Sadat. Okay, well, I hope to talk with him. FBA is crucial. However, Chris Brown just demonstrated the potential of a new market in Africa with 94,000 tickets. So, right, and that's what we need to be talking about. We need to be talking about bringing the Pan-African family together, not dividing us. How would Chris Brown be able to go to Africa and sell out a stadium with 94,000 tickets without them feeling a kinship toward him? I mean, after all, he should. All of his dancing comes from Africa. I mean, he didn't get that from Fred Astaire. So, hey, I mean, I don't care how you slice it. We're connected. Majestic Allah says those people fought for the American Blacks. They were a part of the American Blacks. That's right. We were all the same. 1% of our story. That's not 1%. No. See, again, I think there's some regional differences here. I don't know how many FBA members are New Yorkers. I don't know how many FBA members are Philadelphians or Bostonians. I don't know how many FBA members live in Miami or grew up in Miami. I would suggest and I would suspect that many of the people in the FBA movement have not really grown up in diverse places in terms of the African diaspora. And if that's the case, then that's ignorant. That's taking us back to where we were in the 30s and 40s prior to the African consciousness movement, the Black is Beautiful movement. Yes, thank you. FBA, Muskegon Tribune, one of our great Black newspapers, reminds me, it's not an organization. You're right. I guess it's an ideology, it's a philosophy. Someone said the Nichols brothers. Oh, were they from the Caribbean? Okay, great. I don't know all that who are or who aren't, but I would imagine that when you go through Black American history in the history books, probably 25% of the people that we see as great Black Americans have Caribbean heritage. I would suspect maybe 25%. And don't forget, now a lot of the slaves or enslaved people in the South, they first stopped in the Caribbean, and then they were brought to America. So, let's not forget this. As of today, you're going to have to make the actually stat facts work for me. There's about 1.3 Black immigrants and 14.1 foundational Black Americans. Why should we follow them? Nobody said follow them. I mean, again, and why should we divide ourselves from them? We're all an African people. You don't want to follow Garvey? Okay. He followed Booker T. Washington. You don't, I don't know the ethnicity of Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. I don't know their ethnicity. I'm going to do more research on it. But again, I would say 25% of the people in our history books have Caribbean roots. So why divide? Let's come together. I'll read a few more of these. Let's see. Majestic Allah says we're already divided. Well, but don't you think you're right? Marcus Garvey found us divided. He said Africa for the Africans at home and abroad. Noble Drew Ali found us divided. He tried to bring us together. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad tried to bring us together. Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman said I could have freed a lot more slaves if they had just known they were slaves. So the goal of our movement is to bring people together, not to further divide. So I hope, Brother Majestic Allah, that you would not relish in the fact that we're divided and say, well, let's just throw the towel in and continue to be divided. Gumby Dammit says, I'm not African. You know nothing about it culturally. Well, okay. Well, I'm just going to remind you of what Malcolm said. Why you're not African? You haven't left anything in Africa? Why you left your mind in Africa? You left your mind in Africa. Black Sand says, if you use scientific method, we are North American brown people. See, all of this, I know all of this is the dogma of FBA. This is merely dogma, okay? And that's the only problem with some of these groups. And all groups, all religions, all organizations, they have a dogma. And what you have to learn to do is to be a critical thinker aside from the dogma. The dogma is what you learn at first when your head is empty. You learn, you're catechized in the dogma, and it gives you some talking points. It gives you a worldview where you previously had none. But as you become a critical thinker, as you really begin to analyze, all dogma has its place, okay? But no dogma can be the complete circumference of a person's knowledge. And as you grow in knowledge, as you, I would venture to say that somebody that grew up in Arkansas, that's FBA, has probably only met Black people from Arkansas or Mississippi or somewhere in that region. But you place them in Flatbush, Brooklyn, or if you place them in the East 90s, and they have to interact with brothers and sisters from the Caribbean in churches and schools, etc., that person's going to begin to develop a greater worldview. And they're going to realize, these are my people. I just didn't know it because I had never been around them. And that's what I'm hoping this conversation. Lord Jamar has traveled around the world. Fat Joe, you got to do better, brother. You know, the Black community embraced you. I know you've sat at the foot of Minister Farrakhan and others, but you have always had this little thing where, yeah, I know you grew up in the South Bronx, but you have to understand, you're not a Black American. And I'm sorry that folk, when you were growing up, let you talk like that. But you need to stop it. You're a 50-something-year-old man now. So you got an understanding that's different than one you had growing up as a child in New York City. And so you need to grow in knowledge. That's what we all have to do. And maybe we all can come together. Lastly, and I'm about to go, okay? Anytime someone tells you who they are and insult you, knowledge of who you are, make assumptions and stereotypes about you, is imposing dogma on you. Okay, like putting up flags around a church that never needed flags for its congregation to know each other. I don't even understand that. You all gonna have to type better because some of this is illegible. Pan-Africans, ADOS, Divine Nine, Black immigrant religion, we're done, and that's the FBA movement. Joe is bugging. Okay, I understand that. It's not about division, but claiming what's rightfully ours. Well, you know what? I don't. Let me just say this on the question. And I do think that is going to be that the jockeying for reparations, and I suspect that the jockeying for reparations is what has caused this. Okay, it's like a family. I've been a minister for 38 years. I've done many funerals. Okay, and if you ever want to see some folk get ugly, wait till somebody dies and they start jockeying for who gets what. That's the ugliest thing in the world when it comes to a family. And I have suspected for the last 2 years that I've been hearing, maybe 5 years that I've been hearing about this ADOS and FBA, that it's about jockeying for reparations. And I hope that Black people would not divide ourselves in an ugly way over something that we don't have anyway, okay? There are no reparations, okay? Now, I do believe, and I agree with a lot of things Republicans say, but one thing I disagree with them, one of the great economists, Thomas Sowell, I like a lot of what Thomas Sowell says, but I believe that Black people are entitled to reparations. I absolutely believe that those whose great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents, descendants of American slavery, from the time it began to the time it ends, are entitled to reparations. You say, well, I didn't come here to the 40s or 50s. Well, that's part of what we have to do with the reparations work, because we have to define, are reparations to be paid just for slavery? Are reparations to be paid for slavery and for Jim Crow segregation and the legal systems discrimination, the universities discriminating against us, the job market discriminating against us? Where's the cutoff for reparations? Is it 1965, 64, 65, 68, when basically the Constitution righted itself from the Civil Rights Movement and Blacks got, for the first time, the full legal rights in this country? See, so we got a lot of that we have to talk about, okay? And we haven't really worked that out ourselves yet. But I would say to my brothers and sisters, if we take it to 65, 68, when the last of the great civil rights legislation was passed, when Blacks got full rights in this country, then it will be a lot broader, because people who came from the Caribbean in the 1910s and 20s, they suffered. They were segregated. They suffered under Jim Crow. they were disproportionately discriminated against as Black Americans from the Caribbean. But if it's just an issue of American slavery, if that's what the reparations would be for, okay, then we would say to our brothers and sisters, yes, obviously America would only be responsible for paying reparations to the people that were enslaved in the United States, okay? But that doesn't mean that a case is not to be made against the Portuguese who started slavery, the French, the British, and that's something we all do together. That's what Malcolm was saying. Let's go to the World Court together and talk about the oppression of Black people. Let's not fight over something we don't have, okay? Because it's going to take the genius, the unity of all of us, whatever lawyer, whatever people who draft the reparations bill that will ultimately be passed will probably be people from, again, the entire diaspora. A. Hill says Black immigrants had opportunities while we were discriminated against. Caribbean and Africans came here to go to college. Few of us could go. That's not true. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. We have historically Black colleges throughout the South. In fact, one of the most educated Black people in all of the world are Southern Black people, okay? In the northern cities, only the elite went to places like Fisk and Morehouse and Spelman and Talladega and Tuskegee and Hampton. Most of the Blacks in Chicago and Detroit and St. Louis and Cincinnati and Cleveland went to work in the factories. The elite families sent their children to Southern schools. Same in New York, okay? Only the elite went down to the capstone of Negro education, Howard University. But Black people in the South, whether it was Maryland, North Carolina, Virginia, South Carolina, we have a long history of educated Blacks. So stop. See, you don't know. You're just repeating propaganda. Who do you think went to North Carolina A&T, North Carolina Central? Who do you think went to Allen College and Morris Brown and Fisk and Talladega? So what are you talking about? Africans and Caribbean people had an opportunity to go to schools and we didn't. Lincoln University, Ashman Institute was founded in 1854. We have a long history of Southern Blacks. They're probably the most educated Blacks in the United States. So again, this is foolishness, but I'm going to beat it back at every level. Dave Pacelli says, I've been hearing about reparations my whole life, but never once a lawsuit from the descendants of a slave against a slave owner. Well, you know, I would hate that we would go forth now in all of this mass confusion to try to advocate for reparations. We would be the laughing stock of those that are determined not to give it to us. First thing we have to do is get on one page. We got to stop gotcha leadership. As a leader, you know, we got to bring people together. Dividing people is not leadership. Black people need exponential multiplication, not division. Division makes us small. If you say all light-skinned people, you go over here, and we're going to put you in the category of octoroons and red bones and light, bright, and damn near whites. That makes us smaller. If you take all the people here, say you got curly hair and straight hair, you light brown, teas and tan, bubbling brown sugar, we're going to put you in a separate group. That makes us smaller. Again, the genius of American slavery is it said all of y'all stay together. Everybody, I don't care where you come from, you stay together. And that makes us stronger. The real enemy is Vivek, but y'all stay quiet. Oh, let me say about Vivek. Vivek and Elon, I hear they're encouraging more visas. And let me just say this. Wait a minute, before I get to that. A. Hill says, this man is claiming a right to assets we lost. Caribbeans did not lose assets in this country. I agree. What I'm saying is, I just said, brother, see, you want to argue, A. Hill. I'm saying it depends on the cutoff. It depends on what reparations are ultimately paid for. Again, if they're paid for those who were in chattel slavery in America up until 1865, when the Emancipation Proclamation was signed and slavery officially ended, then that would be limited to people that could trace their ancestry to those descendants. That's not racist. That's not discriminatory. You would have to demonstrate that your lineage goes back to people that suffered that injury. Okay, if you want to call it foundational Black Americans, all right. But if reparations, again, is extended to the civil rights movement, then it would broaden the people that would be entitled to them. So that's where the brain trust of Black people is going to have to mature and come together. And let me just say this last thing. I'm about to make all of y'all mad, okay? As much as you Negroes want to sit up and talk about the founding fathers of this country, okay? I want you to hear this good, okay? I want you to hear this good, all right? As much as you Negroes like to sit up and talk about the founding fathers of this country, the one thing you can't say about them, they came to America for different reasons. They came from different countries. They were different religions. They had settled different colonies. They were not from the same origin. Some came for religious freedom. And most of them came for religious freedom. Actually, the only colony that was established that didn't have anything to do with religion was New York. And New York was founded to do exactly what it is, a city of commerce and trade. But what they were able to do when they rebelled and stood up against the British that were content on making the whole continent a satellite for Great Britain, they were able to come together there in Philadelphia, and they were able to reason together. They were able to compromise. They were able to come up with a constitution, to come up with a system that allowed them, rather than being like the old world, different states, different countries, Germany, France, Great Britain, Amsterdam, Belgium, Holland, rather than being that, they would come together and form one nation. Now, you can talk about them all day long until the cows come home. They were slave owners. They were all white men. But what you cannot deny is that that's what they did. And in 248 years, yes, with our free labor, yes, you got to always tell the full story. But in 248 years, they have eclipsed the world with our free labor. And that's the part that we have to tell. But we got to be able to come together and able to put some mature people together and come up with a reparations plan that we can unite around and put that forth and petition the government. But we have to have unity around it. How come the NAACP and the Black Caucus are not speaking on the reparations matter? See, Bakula Baka, you just got into the movement, brother. One of the great members of the Congressional Black Caucus has done more work on reparations. The former congressman from Detroit, John Conyers, he was a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. That's why I keep telling you, brother, stop acting like Christopher Columbus. You didn't just discover this stuff. Now, in NAACP, they're all boule and sellout. See, some of you just want to fight. So I'll tell you what, I think I've given you a lot to think about. I think I've given you a lot to chew on. Vivek and Elon, let me get to them. I'm trying to get to them. You all keep taking me off. America is a country of immigrants, all right? That's That's another thing that made America great. See, the reason why America is greater than Germany, France, Great Britain, reason why America is greater than Japan is because in America, you find the whole world, okay? In America, you find the whole world. Switzerland is a richer country per capita, but it's a tiny country, so you can't be comparing apples and grapes, okay? But it's homogeneous, okay? And they make some great watches and done some good things, but they haven't impacted the world the way America has in 248 years. See, there's something about a bigger tent. See, when you have a bigger tent, when you bring people from every corner of the earth and put them in one country and give them citizenship and give them equal opportunity and treat them the same, you're going to get from that diverse diasporic people the best of every part of the world. And that's how America became great. And that's why the Black community in America is so great. That's why we produced W.E.B. Du Bois and Carter G. Woodson. That's why we produced Madam C.J. Walker, Nannie Helen Burroughs. That's why we produced Mary McLeod Bethune and James Brown and Gil Scott Heron and Nikki Giovanni. That's how we produce Hank Aaron and Muhammad Ali and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That's how we produce all of the great scholars and great actors and artists and business people, Reginald Lewis, Ken Chenault, because we represent the broadest and most diverse Black community in the world. Nigeria is great. Ghana's great. Cote d'Ivoire is great. Djibouti is great. South Africa is great. But none of those countries can equal the Black experience in America. And they will tell you, because the people we produced are their stars and their celebrities. And for every Nelson Mandela, I can give you 100 Black leaders that they honor and respect, as we honor and respect Brother Mandela, because we're all the same, okay? So I think I've given this enough time. Oh, leave me alone. So the point is this. America's always going to be open for immigrants, but America's got to start taking care of its own people first, okay? We can't take care of, finance the world and continue to have a growing a gap between the haves and have-nots in this country. And that's what these mayors are finding out in these sanctuary cities. That's why you can say whatever you want about that governor in Texas. One of the smartest things he did was to put those immigrants on buses and send them to Martha's Vineyard and send them to New York and Chicago. Boy, I'll tell you, that mayor of Chicago, he's got the toughest job in America, because I don't know of any forum where Mayor Adams in New York or any other mayor has to take questions in the city council chamber from the citizens. Okay, I know that they have to go before the press and in community meetings, but that man seems to have to stand up and take questions from the people in Chicago, and they've been lighting a fire to his backside, as well they should, because he's a left-wing ideologue who is, like many of these people, so interested in taking care of people, but not taking care of their own. And that's what America's got to start doing. Every nation, every great nation is a nation of immigrants. Even throughout history in the world, the greatest cities are always port cities. Port cities always eclipse inland cities. I mean, I love Pine Bluff, Arkansas. I'm sure it's a great place, but it doesn't equal New York City. And it's not that people in Pine Bluff or are second rate or less than New York City. It just means that New York became great because it had ports and people came from all over the world. And that's how the products, the goods, the services were expanded. Okay. And so what I'm saying to you is great nations have immigrants. If you ever want to go to a backwards nation, go to somewhere where there's only one ethnic group, one religion, one color, one type of people. That's an insufferable place. But every nation has to protect its borders, and it has to regulate who comes into their country, okay? And throughout the history of American immigration, America never just had open borders, okay? It never did. Even when the millions of immigrants came to America from Italy, from Moscow, from Germany, from France, and from the Caribbean, okay? Because Caribbean folks came through Ellis Island too. They came because America was at a point where it needed workers. It was expanding westward. There was plenty of territory, and they needed and had the room to open up its doors for millions of people to come in. Okay? Not today. Okay? We got to figure it out first before we can do that again. So, yeah, Vivek, I'm with you. You know, we should allow people to come in, and also no nation allows people to come into their nation that don't add something to it. Do you know that in those days when those immigrants came to this country, they had to have a sponsor? They had to have a family or someone to receive them so that they would not, they had to be able to prove that they would not be a burden on the American society. Did you know that? That's very common, okay? Immigration often revolves around what do we need in this country, okay? And so we should always have immigrants, but we do have to regulate it, and we've got to take care of people in America, okay? FBA stands for Foundational Black Americans. Then I'm going to also say that we have to take care of foundational Americans, okay? Does that make sense? Vivek, he cooked FBA. Okay, I haven't heard that part. But I think everybody's got something that they're saying right and something that they're saying wrong. It's not a zero-sum game, okay? I'm not condemning FBA as though they are irrelevant and have nothing to offer, but just be balanced. Slow down a bit. Stop being so antagonistic. You know, Black people have had a history of arguing and fighting over ideology. Study a little bit. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington argued. The Niagara movement, the intelligentsia. Booker T. Washington was simply saying, let's have some basic. We just got out of slavery. Let's get some skills that we can utilize, that we can offer on the market. Let's get that first, so we can build an economic base. Then we can get an intellectual base. But just coming out of slavery, let's get a base. Let's be able to do something, have some services that we can offer. And Du Bois could not see the importance of that, argued for a more intellectual, more professional-oriented approach, and that he wasn't wrong. It's just that's got to come later. Okay, you can have a degree, but if no one's there to hire you, what are you going to do? And so they argued. And then, of course, in the 60s, we had that same argument. You had the integrationists and the separatists. The integrationists said, no, we got to be able to go to these hotels. We got to be able to sit down in these toilets. And the separatists Namely, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he said, listen, you better build your own schools. You better build your own factories. You better set up some markets and do business to be able to feed yourself. After all, we had already been doing that. The South was littered with black hotels, black insurance companies. That's the advantage of segregation. We couldn't go to their movie theaters. We couldn't go to their markets. So we had to have our own. We argued over that. Neither was wrong, because as citizens in this country, the civil rights movement was great and right. We needed to have, and we were right to demand, civil rights, legal rights in this country. But we were wrong in the sense that we didn't listen to this wise man who said, build your own. And the minute we could go to white hotels, black hotels died. So we got to stop arguing. We've had these arguments, even in the 60s, among the more militant groups. You had the cultural nationalists, Karanga and others, who argued that culture was determinative of empowerment, okay? And then you had the revolutionary nationalists, the Panthers, who said, no, it's not about color or dashikis or some ancient African culture. It's about revolution and overthrowing the government. Well, they were wrong, because you're not going to overthrow the United States government. The only thing that will overthrow the United States government is God and its own hubris, okay? And maybe China down the road. But you can forget that. That's not going to happen, okay? And that's why Eldridge Cleaver died, not only a born-again Christian, but a capitalist, selling jeans, okay? Bobby Seale, last I heard in Philadelphia, he was selling barbecue sauce. So let's be realistic. But the point was, the Panthers had some good ideas. And unfortunately, us and the Panthers couldn't come together because we're always arguing. We're always arguing. Let's find synthesis. That's what we need. There's not one person that has everything. It's the plethora, it's the genius of Black people that has given us everything we can possibly have. Now, listen, I love you, foundational Black Americans, ADOS folks. You all are certainly energetic. Now, I've given you 2 hours, and I hope you will tell your friends and relatives about Conversations with Conrad. We come on once a week, and I hope you will like, subscribe, and share this program. I guarantee you're going to get a world-class education. I guarantee you're going to think differently. Do mixed people count as FBA? That's an interesting question. These are things we have to discuss. According to America's One Drop Blood, again, that's the advantage of it. They did. That gave us strength. That gave us numbers. That's why, don't you see it would be a big mistake for Black people to become so narrow and agitate. So, well, you got to be foundational Black American. You got to be 100% Black. Then that's going to bifurcate us and create 50 different racial categories, and we won't have any political power. People won't think in terms of Blacks. See, our advantage now is the political class. When they think of us, they think in terms of Blacks. And that's a good thing, because when you add everybody up, that gives us a significant number of people. When you start breaking us down, that gives us less political power. I hope you understand. I got to go. God bless you. God keep you. Stop fighting. Fat Joe, come on, brother. I love you. Do better. Lord Jamar, come on. You got supreme wisdom. Bring us together. Let's come together. Respect each other and love each other. And if we do that, we have a chance to survive. Thank you. Have a good evening. That's it for today.